So welcome everybody, great to have you here. Exciting. So David, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to go straight to the scary end and jump into toxic people. So what are the telltale signs of a psychopath in the workplace?
One of the most obvious things is deep division in the workplace. So people don't have ambiguous feelings about psychopaths. They either love them or really, really hate them. So that's usually a sign. When you can walk into a workplace and you'll find some people who think this person is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and other people will tell you that they're the devil incarnate. And it really depends whether or not the person is of any use to the psychopath. So if they're someone that can provide something for the psychopath, they will shower them with charm and be the most competent person they've ever encountered and the most charming person. If they're of no use to them, then they'll treat them like any other piece of office furniture.
Right. So I'm interested in the dollar cost, because we're all here, people running businesses. So what might be some of the signs from
there's
the
one
dollars?
In the workplace.
Yeah.
From a dollar perspective, as soon as a psychopath enters a workplace, things start heading south in terms of employee turnover. You start having massive staff turnover as soon as there's a psychopath there. People start heading for the exits as fast as they can. The ones that can't leave use all their sick leave.
Right.
So they start, you see enormous increases in sick leave and absenteeism, even, I've forgotten the trendy term for it, but being there but not being there.
Presenteeism.
Presenteeism,
Yeah.
that's the one.
That's the one.
Yeah, you see a lot of that.
Right. So how would you fix it? In a word.
The easiest way is to get rid of the psychopath. That is usually a lot easier said than done, because the psychopath is usually very, very good at ingratiating themselves with the people who can affect their future path. So for as long as that's HR, then it'll be HR, or it'll be the CEO or the chair of the board, or it depends how far up in the organisation they are. But they'll always ensure the people above them think they're absolutely terrific, and they'll also make sure that they can identify people below them who can be blamed and sacrificed. So they're very, very difficult to get rid of. The only way if you can't get rid of them, is to control them. And the best way to control them is to enforce absolute honesty in the workplace. No private meetings, absolute openness and honesty the entire time. No one-on-one discussions about projects or objectives. Always open and honest. Honesty defeats psychopaths because they work on the basis of telling you one thing and the person next to you something else.
So that's interesting, isn't it? Because it sounds slightly reactive and as though you're advocating a protectionist kind of culture, but in fact it's what we actually want to be doing anyway, isn't it? So if we happen to scoop up the psychopaths in the process, it sounds like we might be
Honesty gets
on
rid
the
of
right track.
psychopaths because they can't stand it.
No.
It restricts their behaviour too much and they'll find somewhere else.
Thank you, David. So Sandra, I'd like to speak to you. You, as a former CEO and a leading figure in the arts, I'd like to talk to you about the challenges of working with creative and passionate people, and how in your role as leader you dealt with that.
Well, creative and passionate people, the word passion I think is described it all, both in commissioning content from writers and directors and producers, and in running the film school, which was full of people from the sector. Most of the people that I work with or have worked with care deeply about what they do. It's not only their work, it's their hobby, it's their passion, it's everything they think about, it's everything they value. Their credibility is important, their ideas are important. So that sounds wonderful, but the downside is that they're also very inflexible, and that they all believe so passionately in what they're doing that they always need to be right. So they can be very difficult environments to get consensus and to ensure that everybody feels valued. I can't say that I always got it right, but I tried very hard to do things like have an open door policy, which included things like I'd always start the day in the cafe, having my morning coffee, but I always made sure that everyone felt they could sit down and talk to me or have a whinge or chat about anything they felt like, and that it was a kind of space where it was open and neutral and easy to talk. I also tried very hard to encourage people, and I think the thing we've been talking about earlier about empathy is things are going well when people feel comfortable to disagree openly. I think that's always a terrific sign. I love a meeting or a get-together when people are disagreeing and everyone's hearing it at the same time. The thing that can be tricky is when people say nothing and have that sort of folded arms and pursed lips and go away and gang up together. I think that's not good. So I tried very hard always to enjoy disagreement, to enjoy conflict, to make it a positive, to have some self-deprecating humour, to do anything to say, look, it's easy, let's all share our views. You can't always reach agreement, but you can try to create an environment in which they feel comfortable in disagreeing and still feel that their passion and their thoughts and values are respected.
So we can see that Sandra ran a smart organisation. Yeah. So, Faye, I'd love to now draw on your very rich experience as an employment lawyer. And, of course, I say relative to what I'm doing, you're working at what we call the train smash end, working with people and their problems in the workplace. And I want to take you straight away to a point that you talked to me about preparing for this talk. And we talked about the fact that you said the most aggrieved bullying claims are about feelings. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you see that and what that means?
Yeah, sure. It was a lesson I learned early in my career. I started travelling the country and running bullying investigations and some sexual harassment investigations as well. But I was a very green lawyer about 18 years ago, looking for meticulous statements about what was said, when it was said, by whom, who was present, what witnesses were available, and I would, as sure as night turned to day, sit in front of the aggrieved victim or complainant, and they would tell me about how they felt. I remember going home and crying at night. I remember that, I would go home to my husband and I said I couldn't go back to the office the next day, or I left a particular party, and it was always about their feelings. And I would have to sort of work backwards. I'd have to acknowledge the feelings, and I am compassionate. I do like a coffee and I have an acquired taste for a gin and tonic, but I like to think I am not a psychopath. I wouldn't have been invited to speak. Pretty sure.
No, that's true.
So it was a lesson that I learnt about the human condition really early. And what I also found was that the people that actually, had the meticulously crafted complaints that, had the bullet points and gave me all the things that I wanted were probably the most disingenuous or the most likely to be vexatious complainants. So, but I talk about this, I always refer to the Maya Angelou quote, which is, people forget how, what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And that's what, that's the first time I read that. I remembered those people, and they were always the most aggrieved. The other thing that I will say is that in 18 years after running so many cases, it's not the best legal claims that run. It's the people that have felt the most aggrieved on the way out. And there's nothing worse than the quest of the vexatious complainant who has an axe to grind with someone that's pissed them off on the way out the door. So the flip side to that, or the positive side to that, is that, a little bit of compassionate management. Yes, restructures need to happen. Yes, we need to counsel and discipline people. Yes, they need to meet KPIs. There's a whole heap of things that we need to do on a day-to-day basis in order to run, productive and profitable organisations. However, I think a little bit of leadership, development and compassion and empathy and all the things we've been talking about can actually go a long way to minimise what is otherwise a legal complaint. So when we talk about the law, we say, look, the law is actually a baseline. Compliance is your baseline. If you have values-based leadership and if you're leading with values that are powerful like respect or inclusion, well, frankly, if you respect someone, you can't bully them. You can't be inclusive if you're sexually harassing or discriminating someone. So if you can live by the high water mark, which is your values and your purpose, and engage and inspire based on that, then the law should take care of itself and all the psychopaths will be removed from the world.
Wow, I love that. People call me a Pollyanna, but that's
we can
fantastic.
do TED Talks instead.
Thank you. And Robin, I'd love to now switch to you. I know that you have so much experience working with lawyers and their particular traits, and we don't want to feel sensitive about the fact, because I can say so because I was once one too, that we're up on David's list. I'm just going to take you there. I'm going to take you off script. I'm going to take you there. What do you think when you see something like that on a list?
Okay, so poor old lawyers. I think they do get a bit bashed up. I'm not a lawyer, I confess. And I've worked with lawyers and bankers and, you know, fairly high-performing people, and you do meet people who, I don't know if I'd call them a psychopath, but certainly toxic people who pervade your culture with negativity. And I think for lawyers, though, there's sometimes a unique makeup in them in that they're trained to be critical of things.
Yeah.
They're actually trained to dispute. They're usually perfectionistic or often perfectionistic. And so I think that's why we see such high prevalence of things like mental health and anxiety in law as a profession, because they already come equipped with those things that are quite challenging. Where I see conflict in law firms and in other organisations, but particularly for lawyers, is where they are not curious. They don't stay open. They're going to fight for a position. They're going to take a position in what they're defending or responding to in their work. And sometimes you see some of them where they just get very, very fixed on a position. And they almost attach their identity to that position and they can't move from it. And that's where I've seen conflict happen at times, where people don't remain open. And of course the other area is from a leadership perspective, or at an individual level, where people are not open to being self-aware. Often you see conflict in a workplace where, you know, somebody will make a complaint about the way that they're being spoken to. And when you actually look into the matter, even if it's not a formal situation, you hear from the person about how that person made them feel. And so actually sometimes it's the person that is talking to, the way that they're speaking to someone is a response to the way they're being spoken to. So I actually think if people could be curious and look to be self-aware in how they're coming across and how they're engaging, a lot of these sorts of issues would be reduced.
So I'm just going to take you back to this position, why did I use that word? Back to the spot that you said that lawyers can remain very fixed. They've got this trait and it's ingrained in them and it makes them good at what they do. What do you do to sort of try to shift people out of that space, out of that default
I think
behaviour?
To encourage them earlier on in conversations or in debate or considering situations. So let's say they have a client situation and they're supporting a client with a particular position. They've taken a strong stance on a legal matter. I think it's worthwhile people testing that hypothesis with others around them, testing it with colleagues, being open and listening to clients and making sure that they're not so fixed on the position that they think is the right one without testing all of those facts. Of course, in the end, they do need to take a position and they do need to defend that, but sometimes, and I remember hearing feedback on a young lawyer once, a relatively young lawyer, who was really offending their client because they'd taken such a strong stance on it where they weren't listening to their client actually and they weren't hearing properly what was going on, that their client was like, actually, we don't really want to deal with that person anymore because they're taking a strong position but it's not correct and they're not listening. So sometimes I think you need to just encourage them to engage in debate and discussion and disagreement.
Yes.
In a way which is trying to get the best outcome.
Lovely, thank you. And Faye, I'm going to just go back to you because I wanted to get you to share with the group your hot tips for minimising exposure to the risk of bullying and harassment claims. If you had a few hot tips for our...
Yeah, look, we started with the high water mark, which is where I usually end, and I think that is, you know, a really good place to start, even though we advocate for policies and procedures. Obviously, they're not just, you know, a nice to have, they are necessary and they will protect you from legal risk. But to the extent that they're, they're prescriptive, to the extent that they need to be in order to, protect you from claims like, in the applications to stop the bullying and stress claims, but they should also incorporate language that goes to your values. And then it turns on promulgation. I mean, you really need to be uncompromising in the way that you promulgate the values and also the policies. You have to indiscriminately enforce them. We always talk about the untouchable manager, and we've covered them, quite often today. There's a revolving door beneath them, so they may seem like they're untouchable, and they may seem that their top line, worth to the business may be significant, but when you look at what the exit costs are, when you look at what the turnover costs are. In fact, the Are You OK survey found that 46% of people would rather leave than address a workplace relationship issue, and 48% will revert to avoidance strategies such as absenteeism. So I always say, basically, you lose the best of them because they're the ones that are going to find the other job, and you disengage the rest of them. So what could someone be possibly bringing in that is worth that to the workplace? So that's the promulgation piece that we often talk about. And then it comes down to having the conversation, having the training, a different sort of training with your workers, obviously, which talks about what is bullying, frankly, what's not bullying. Some things can be, reasonable management action, and there are issues with resilience, and there are issues with, interpersonal conflicts, and we need to be clear what's not bullying in our discussions with our workers. But also, in terms of cultural change, the bystander piece is critical. Whether we're talking about sexual harassment or we're talking about, the elimination of bullying and harassment, if we want to see cultural change, yes, it matters what leaders do, and the culture will be shaped by the worst behaviour the leaders will tolerate, but we need to bring others on board too, and that bystander piece is critical.
Thank you. So Sandra, I'm going to just flip quickly back to you, because I know that you now have a wealth of experience in working at board level, and I know from the work that I do that working with boards can be tricky, and it's an interesting space to work. So if you had a bit of wisdom from challenges that you might have faced communicating with fellow board members, is there anything particular you'd love to share with us there?
I think the issue of boards probably raises gender issues as much as anything else. I guess the thing that I think always is to be very clear about what you think, to be fearless in articulating what you think in the most respectful way, and trying to be part of an environment where everybody's contribution is equal and respected, which sounds nice. It's not always easy, but I think it's really important that you do make your contribution in a respectful mode and expect to have that returned.
Thank you. And that, I suppose we all know, applies so broadly across all workplaces. So if we can take that kind of broad way of thinking back to each of our workplaces, it's a pretty high bar to jump. So thank you to my fabulous panel for giving up your time and sharing with us today your wealth of experience. Thank you.